Good evening. Welcome, everyone. Thanks for coming along to the fourth Living Lab for the Forest Carbo Vision Irish project. This evening's session is titled Communities, Carbon and Forests. And the question that we're going to be exploring together is when and how can individuals and communities benefit from forest carbon farming? So I'm going to start with just a little bit of housekeeping. Just to let you know, this session is being recorded. We'd like to ask you to please keep your microphone muted unless you're speaking, and we will have a dedicated Q&A at the end. In the meantime, if there's a question that you want to ask straight away, you can put it in the chat and we'll come to it later. And we'll also be having a series of polls throughout the webinar. So this is part of our data gathering for the project. So we'd really appreciate if everybody could participate in those because the information is really, really helpful. And also, if you could please make sure that your screen name includes your actual name as well as your organization or your role in the project or your interest in the project. So it might be a landowner or community or policy maker or one of those. So here's an overview of our agenda. We are expecting it to be a 2-hour webinar. We've tried to keep it as brief as possible, but there's just so much information to get through. So I won't read out the agenda, but all of the team will be speaking, all of our team, as well as speakers from the Institute of Natural Resources, Finland, and we've got someone from Kieran from Wilderway is going to be speaking, and then we're going to have an interactive session later on. So just a quick overview for anyone who doesn't already know about the project. Forest Carbo Vision is co-funded by the Interreg Northern Periphery and Arctic, and it looks at Objective 2.2, promoting climate change adaptation and disaster risk prevention, resilience, and taking into account ecosystem-based approaches. The project started in May of last year, and it will end in April 2028. Green Skibbereen is a partner along with the Agricultural University of Ireland, the Oulu University of Applied Sciences in Finland, and the Natural Resources Institute of Finland as well. So just to introduce our team, if you haven't met us already, my name's Anna, I'm the project manager. We've got Jose Ospina, who's our board liaison. Michelle is our stakeholder engagement coordinator. Mark is our environmental coordinator, and Sinead is our marketing and communications coordinator. And you'll be hearing from all of the team later on in the meeting. Right, so now I'm going to hand over to Sinead. She's going to give you a little update on where we are currently.
Hello, everyone. So just to do a quick update on where the project stands as of May of 2026. Back in December 2025, we held the Living Lab 3 at Myers Woodhouse. We had about 25 stakeholders join us that included forest owners, community groups, advisors, and policymakers. You really gave us clear feedback. You told us about skill gaps and barriers, things like not knowing how to measure carbon on your land, what tools exist, what methods are credible, and what they actually cost. In March, we ran a LiDAR demonstration at CCAS. It showed how remote sensing technology can help measure forest carbon. It was practical and hands-on, and the feedback was very positive. We also agreed on the structure for the toolkit version 0.1 with all of our project partners. You'll soon be invited to review and help us shape it further, and that brings us to today, the Living Lab 4. It's all about community and individual benefits, so you're at the right place at the right time. All right, so what you told us in Living Lab 3. So on the left column, you'll see that you've asked us practical questions on how to measure carbon, what tools and methods exist, and what they cost. You told us you need a clear checklist and a mentor, someone who has done it before. You also stressed that carbon farming should not only be for large owners and corporations. Small owners need a path in it too. On the right, you'll see a repeated concern that co-benefits like biodiversity, wild water quality, flood risk reduction are not yet clearly integrated into carbon frameworks. You also raised equity questions on who bears the risks, who benefits, and how are smallholders included. The key takeaway is to don't forget the smallholders and also don't separate the carbon from the co-benefits. That feedback is directly shaping today's discussion and shaping our toolkit. The progress is real. We're still in early stages, but your input tonight in the polls, in the chat, and especially in the breakout rooms will really shape what goes into the toolkit and what we're going to focus our efforts in next. So thank you for participating today.
Sorry, I'm having trouble with the slides again. Oh, there we go. Sorry. Now they've suddenly caught up. Apologies. Okay, right. So now we're going to hand over to Mark Robbins, our environmental coordinator.
Yeah, good evening. We begin to get into the meat of this evening's session here. We're talking about pathways to access these carbon credits. And I mean, there's two ends of the spectrum here, from the very individual pathway where someone might have full control of their circumstances. There will be a forest owner. They'll take all the risks and responsibilities, to the other end of the pathway where there might be forest owners collaborating, where they might want to work with communities and other interests, a kind of much more collective pathway. And we're going to offer a set of examples and case studies in the middle there, which we hope will give you some thoughts, some ideas and some prompts for the conversation later. Thank you. Then you probably all know this, but if you go to a search engine and you look at global carbon markets, you find a very difficult history of poor practice, poor delivery, and so on, which cuts to the heart of this project in a way, which is to ensure we have the means and the methods and the tools to make sure there is good delivery, there is good practice, there isn't greenwashing, there isn't double counting, and it does work for individuals and communities at large. So we acknowledge straight away there's a difficult history, but this project is all about how we find the means to overcome that. Thank you. And then we've been told very loudly in our sessions to date that if this is going to be more than something for the big owners, the kind of corporate interests, then there are real issues around equity and inclusion, and especially around community value. And that's, again, one of the major focuses this evening, about what are these things, how might we ensure them, how might the policy framework operate to ensure these things are actioned, how might the buyers be very secure that they're also buying, say, some environmental outcomes alongside the carbon outcomes. So two strong themes around equity and community value. And we hope we're going to have a really good conversation around those issues.
Thank you very much, Mark. Okay, so now we're going to hand over to Evgeny, who is the lead partner in the project from the Natural Resources Institute of Finland, and he's going to be talking to us about the digital twins that they've been creating. So, Evgeny, would you like me to share the website, or will you do that?
Would you like to allow me to share my screen, because I can maybe
go ahead.
Yeah, so I'll start to share my screen. And good evening, everybody. So my name is Evgeny Lapare. I'm working as a coordinator of the project, actually. And today, what I would like to focus is on part of our this forest carbon vision farming toolkit, what we are developing within the project. It's not yet ready, but just to address a question where we are at the moment and how do we see this toolkit. So we are developing a practical toolkit for the stakeholders. And today you will see the first prototype of this kind of online platform. I will be showing the data from Finland, but later on we will share the data also for Ireland and Iceland already collected data. And the format of this toolkit, it will be like in the form of website, so that owners or stakeholders will be able to see the forest digital twins, but also we are going to publish like a book about how to do it. And it will contain of also on the second part of the toolkit will contain of this so-called carbon measurement and data layer, which I will be showing you today. So we are still developing it. That's why for us it's extremely important to get feedback from your side. So probably you could also advise us what would be the best approach, and we are really here to would like to present what we have at the moment, and also where into which direction we are going. But also it will be very important that if you could also give your comments and maybe to correct our direction if you think it would be better, certain approaches could be better developed. And then we will have also decision support layer, which we will be developing later on, but we will present the concept today. And so practically, our final output within the project, what we call our forest carbon farming toolkit, will be supported by the case studies. And we have now those case studies in Finland, Iceland, Ireland, and the data sets which we are making publicly available, where we can really demonstrate, like, okay, we take this forest site, we count, we fly the drones, we create a forest digital twin, and then from this forest digital twin, for every tree, we measure the tree height, diameter, we calculate the volume, we calculate the carbon content, and then, for example, after certain management decisions or management approaches, will be changes in the carbon, and we can really document like how much additional carbon was, for example, stored in particular forest stem. And now what we did, we are working with this, how we can convert this point cloud data. So when the drone is flying and the LiDAR is flying, we are able to collect those points. And then we are converting them into this qualitative structure models of the trees. I will be showing you today. We developed an analytical pipeline, which is now able to get the drone-based remotely sensing-based data collected in the form of point cloud. Then it's converted those point clouds, it's classified the points, and now we will be showing you today how we managed to get, for example, trees out of it. So individual trees identified, each individual tree is measured. We have a tree height for the individual tree, diameter, stem curve for individual tree, recognized species. But then we are working further, like on quality structure models, and then finally calculation of the basic parameters for so-called the baseline. So when we start any carbon farming project, we need to understand like what is the basis for our calculation. And then we are developing it further that when you have this digital twin available, practically you could apply certain forest management scenarios. For example, in case of carbon farming, it could be optimized thinning scenario, or it could be extension of rotation. In, for example, in Finnish case, we are very often applying fertilization, for example, by spreading ash in low productivity stands, or it could be also certain other measures which would increase carbon accumulation within the forest stands. For example, recently we were contacted by one of our Canadian partners, and they are using quite interesting method called inoculation. So they are inoculating certain fungi species into the seedlings to speed up the growth of the trees. And so when you apply different management approaches, by this way you could, for example, maximize the growth of the trees, and then you need again to measure the carbon. And when to be able to really to bring transparency into the market and to overcome all those difficulties of the past, we are in this project, we are developing a technology based on LiDAR scanning in direct measurements, and kind of without kind of modeling, but just direct measurements from LiDAR, to be able to get clear understanding at the level of individual trees, like how much carbon is additionally accumulated for every single tree. And now I will show you one prototype what we now developing, and this is this prototype is kind of still in the development process. It's actually I hope, do you see my screen, by the way, because I've got some notice from.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. So you can see, for example, this prototype is available on this forestdigitaltwin.ai /subset. And this is our first prototype, what we now developed for Finland for one very small site. Practically, with this prototype, you can already, zoom into level of individual trees. So you can see how the trees look like from laser scanning data for the forest sites. So soon we will be publishing the same for forest sites in Ireland. But then, for example, when you zoom in into individual trees, you can, for example, classify them by class. So, for example, you classify point clouds, you can already see like what are which points are representing the stem, which points are representing the branches and leaves. But then for every tree, you have this kind of basic information. So if you click, for example, to a particular tree, you can see the exact tree location, exact tree height, diameter, crown diameter, and all other parameters. Soon we will have also the carbon parameters after the species classification available in this website. And then the second thing what you can do is you can actually, for certain trees, you could already, now with this prototype, you can already calculate you could already, for example, just for visualization purposes, you could already have those qualitative structure models calculated, for example, in for certain trees. Like I can zoom one of this tree, and you can see really that it is like a stem. So this positioning we are still working on it, but kind of this is the way how we're going to present it in the future. But what I would like to highlight that this is this type of data is not something general, but this is kind of, it's real data located in real locations, so it's georeference. So it's representing real trees. For example, if I switch on this base map, so you will see this is like a forest located in certain site. And for example, if I would like to see like satellite data in background, you can see where it is located in Finland. So this is the way we are going further. And our idea with this prototype is that once we collected the data with a drone, we could collect it 2 times. So what we have now created in the project, for several sites in Ireland, we collected the initial data during our field campaigns last year and this beginning of this year. Then during this year, the forest will grow. So each individual tree will increase in height and diameter. And then we will have a second flight campaign by the end of this year, so that practically for every single tree, we'll be able to show how much was the growth in terms of cubic meters. And by knowing the species, by knowing the density of the wood, we can calculate for every single tree, like how much actually carbon this particular tree accumulated from atmosphere and store, for example, in the stem. Maybe I will stop at this point, and but I would be very happy to answer to any, if there are any questions or comments in our Q&A session. And I give a floor to our next speaker. Thank you.
Thank you, Evgeny. Okay, so our next speaker is Ville also from the Natural Resources Institute of Finland. So I will just share the presentation here.
Yes, hello everyone, and I apologize for some reason I can't. My Zoom doesn't capture my video, so I have to do it without the face now, I guess, this time.
No
but hopefully that's okay. So Anna, if you can run the slides for me, thank you.
No problem.
So I will first briefly introduce myself. So my name is Ville Hietalahti. It's a bit of a tricky last name, I guess. So I'm currently work as a business advisor at the Natural Resources Institute of Finland, but I have my background in forest industry, so working 20 years at Stora Enso, one of the big multinational forest companies with a strong holding in Finland and in Sweden. I'm also a forester by education, but I've done a lot of my work more around strategy development and in finance. But I in this role at the Luke, so when Evgeny just covered what we are developing, it is basically a digital measurement reporting and verification, an integrated platform for forest carbon. But not only for that, I think that has capabilities for natural capital resource planning purposes more widely. But here the focus is mainly on carbon farming. Today, I will just provide you a very brief overview to community forestry in Finland. If we can go to the next slide. So, like I said, I will keep this on a fairly high level. Of course, there are quite a bit of details here, but the model for community forestry in Finland is built around jointly owned forest. This is something that goes way back already to the late 19th century when in the forest law there were provisions then for sort of co-owned forest assets. The definition for this yhteismetsä, as we have it in Finland, so community jointly owned forest, is that it is a privately owned forest land managed collectively for the benefit of shareholders. I will cover the legal basis more in detail on the coming slide, but like I said, this has a very long history, and it also has linkage to the land reform in Finland in 1925. After the civil war in Finland, and once Finland gained independence, this land reform also meant that this model was basically leveraged on when allocating state-owned forest land to private owners, and there's a linkage to that as well. So scale today there is roughly 600 jointly owned forests, totaling about 800,000 hectares. This represents about 5% of the total private forest in Finland. And currently there are about 25,000 shareholders nationwide. The underlying purpose for these jointly owned forests is to ensure that these forests are managed with the principles of sustainable forestry for the economic, ecological, and social objectives. But I should also then mention that this is also very much also included in the Finnish forest law. So nothing special there, but this has actually been sort of enforced principles from the beginning, all the way from the late 19th century. And it is really for the shareholders in this jointly owned forest to decide how the different dimensions of sustainable forestry are balanced. So still decision power resides then with the jointly owned forest entities. The maybe one well, if we right. So maybe if you still go back to the previous one, because I think even if I will come back to that, but so I think maybe of course not having very good overview to the Irish context, but this model in a way has certain benefits, and one of the purposes clearly has been to basically separate these day-to-day management activities from the ownership. So because these once pooled also involve some synergies, and maybe most importantly to ensure that that the forest ownership in Finland does not get too fragmented, and because there are always absent owners in private sector, so this is actually something that addresses it, and maybe some inspiration to Ireland as well. Then let's go to the next one. So how does this collective ownership work in practice? The legal basis for jointly owned forests in Finland is baked into the Act on Jointly Owned Forest, and this was reformed in 2003. Like I said, the origins go way back, and into the 1925 land reform, and then the status of these jointly owned forest is that these are separate legal entities. The land remains in private property, so it's not common. But maybe worth mentioning that in Finland there is, and this applies to all forest estates in Finland, there is what's called a everyman's rights. So in Finland, anyone can enjoy the nature and to some extent also use the ecosystem services in forest with berry picking and mushroom picking. This is something that you know is included in this everyman's right principle, and to basically go around and track in the forest and pick the berries. I mean, that is not something which would require permission from the landowner. So it's basically granted for all citizens and everyone in Finland. So the decision making in these jointly owned forest is built around the shareholders association agreement. So there is a voting power which is based on the sort of ownership share in the joint forest, and all the decisions are taken by majority rule. The scale also matters. So Finnish Forest Center, which is sort of advisory and coordinating body in Finland, recommends that jointly owned forests should exceed at least 100 hectares to ensure the economic viability of those as legal entities. So the value levers for this concept is obviously the professional management and benefits of scale, stable, predictable income for owners, and reduced pressure to sell or liquidate, sell land or liquidate forest in these jointly owned forest. So just want to underline, there's a very strong legal basis for this in Finland and well tested, and so therefore again maybe something that may serve as an inspiration also then. But again, just very, of course, fundamental thing is that the legal and governance foundation needs to be there to enable this. Maybe then to the next slide. The economic and community benefits, of course, the primary revenue in this jointly owned forest comes from the timber sales and long-term harvest planning. All these jointly owned forests have sort of operating procedures that are mandatory, and it also involves basically sort of long-term management strategy and long-term harvest planning. So all these jointly owned forests have a valid forest management plans in place, which are regularly updated. And then the benefits are very much around economics of scale, lower transaction and management cost, easy access to professional services, and then maybe of relevant importance is also then the community dimension. So especially for families and estates and local groups, this is a feasible model which prevents parcelization across generations, because I guess this accession is always something that in land ownership can be quite tricky. So this model offers a sort of easy and feasible way to address those challenges. So shareholder benefits are annual profit distribution and forest ownership without operational burden, and then of course long-term asset preservation over time. So I'm sure also in Ireland these succession challenges persist and are evident. So there's a bit of an evergreen topic, and sort of sharing here how we've dealt with that in Finland. But of course, I mean, there are, besides these jointly owned forests in Finland, so there are in total 600,000 private forest owners, which means that in a country of less than 6 million people, it means that 1 in 10 in Finland is a forest owner. And again, part of this is then the management and the ownership is organized through this joint forest, but a majority is still basically privately owned. Approximately 25 hectares, I guess, in average is the normal ownership. And of course, these succession challenges are always a sort of important topic. Then maybe, I think it's the last slide. Then this carbon farming and ecosystem services, like, for any forest owner or regardless of the entity. So this actually creates a sort of a new value stream that forest owners can benefit from. These opportunities are quite suitable for the jointly owned forest because of the sort of large forest areas, long-term management horizon, and the single legal entity is quite simple for contracts and also for measurement, reporting, and verification. So there is these synergies are particularly sort of relevant for the jointly owned forest. Potential climate actions, well, I think Yevgeny already addressed some of these different methods under improved forest management for extended rotations, continuous cover forestry, spacing optimization, and fertilization as the most relevant ones. But this emerging opportunity and these future carbon credit schemes and result-based payments, it is quite likely that these kind of pilot projects are conducted in this type of for larger and contiguous forest areas than sort of individual small holdings and fragmented holdings because of the cost and the ability to implement. So, of course, would be very happy to hear back comments and feedback. I guess is it in Ireland that you have this farm forest sort of cooperation through farm forest groups, which is basically more like an ecosystem of or network rather than sort of any sort of legal operator. But this is just something that again we have a long history with this concept in Finland, and now with these emerging opportunities, we believe this also will be to the benefit of the shareholders in these jointly owned forests. Maybe I'll stop there, and then happy to take your questions in the Q&A.
Thank you, Vila. That was fascinating. That was brilliant. Thank you. Okay, so we're going to move on. Now we've got a presentation from Kieran from Wildaway. Kieran, you were going to share your own slides, I think.
Yeah, thanks, Anna. Let me see. That coming through okay?
Yeah.
Hello, everyone. Thanks for having me. My name is Kieran Ford. I'm a business development manager with Wildaway. So I was kind of asked to talk about funding forestry, I suppose, in Ireland from the perspective of a carbon credit developer. So I'll do a bit of an introduction to Wildaway. I'll talk about some funding options, I'll talk about where carbon credits come into play, I suppose. And then I'll just share a few pictures maybe about potential kind of alternative type of woodland project in Ireland. Um, so, Wilder Way is a carbon and nature credit development company. We're essentially a spin out from an NGO, Rewilding Europe, which is focused on expanding the space for nature, I suppose, in Europe. We're a team of 14 people spread across the Netherlands, Spain, the UK, and Ireland. And effectively, my job is to find landowners that are interested in nature restoration projects and help them to use credits to fund that work or benefit for it from in the long term. So how we work is we partner with landowners. We help them to develop credits. We share the majority of the revenue with the landowner from the sale of those credits. So I think Mark mentioned at the start about this idea of benefit sharing and how that works. So our aim always is for the majority of the revenue to go back to the landowner and stay in the local community. And then we monitor for impact. So that means that we usually are responsible for the MRV. So obviously in the case of a forest, that might be using tools like that are being developed by this project, LiDAR models, and for other types of projects, it might be a different type of technology that we'd use. Our focus is on kind of three broad areas, so peatlands, forests, and mosaic habitats. So yeah, with respect to peatlands, obviously we're interested in rewetting peatlands and restoring them from a forestry perspective. It's about either protecting kind of old growth forests or establishing a new forest. And then with respect to mosaic habitats, I always think about that as almost like everything else. So in this context, it might be grazing across large areas or things like that. Currently, we have 5 different projects across 4 different countries. So 3 carbon credit projects and 2 nature credit projects. One of the carbon credit projects is a peatland restoration project in Ireland. And another one of the carbon projects is a old growth forestry project in Spain. In terms of funding for community forests in Ireland and the role that credits could play in that. So this is one slide that aims to try and summarize a lot. But obviously there are public and private financing mechanisms that could be used. The main public ones in terms of afforestation and the maintenance of existing forests would come from DAFM in terms of grants and premiums. But there's also lots of other types of grants that can be availed of, like LACAP, so Local Authority Waters Program, or sorry, Local Authority Climate Action Plan, LawPro, which is the Waters Program, Environmental Protection, NPWS, even Inland Fisheries Ireland, and different European innovation partnerships. I suppose these all provide money for things like ecosystem services or reforesting of alluvial zones along rivers to help protect fish and stuff like that. So oftentimes there are supports for establishing forests or planting trees that may not necessarily be kind of obvious to begin with. With respect to private financing, so there's direct philanthropy or fundraising. There's lots of woodland charities and CLGs, I suppose, that are interested in establishing woodlands or restoring woodlands. There's credits in the form of carbon or nature. And even if we look further down the tracks, so in England, they have set up a biodiversity net gain market. And there's been some kind of consultation from organizations like Transport Infrastructure Ireland around implementing something similar in Ireland. So again, I suppose it's all around this idea of natural capital or ecosystem services or whatever language you might choose to use, and um, how we can pay landowners essentially for these services. I probably don't have to tell this audience, or answer the question what a carbon credit is, but essentially it's 1 ton of carbon dioxide equivalent or avoided. And when we talk about carbon markets, it's a kind of a broad term, but again, it can usually be split into kind of compliance markets. So credits that have to be traded to be in line with a law, or the voluntary carbon market, which is the area that I work in. So this is where credits can be bought by companies on a voluntary capacity, because they want to offset their emissions, or they want to be supporting nature restoration projects or biodiversity projects. And similarly, within the voluntary carbon market, there are all types of carbon credits. So there are technological credits, so from things like energy or carbon capture. And then there are nature-based carbon credits, which are the ones obviously that we're interested in. And forestry is one type of nature-based carbon credit. And within the forestry, there are different types of projects that can be undertaken, different types of projects that can produce credits. So there's afforestation and restoration, so credits generated from the establishment of new forests. There's IFM type projects, improved forest management, that was mentioned by the previous speaker. And I think Mark talked at the beginning about the bad press associated with carbon credits, and often they're associated with these REDD+ type projects. So yeah, again, a carbon credit isn't one thing, or a carbon credit project isn't one thing, a good or a bad thing. There are all sorts, and each should be I suppose, judged on its own merits, I think. In terms of the kind of the stakeholders or the different parties involved in generating carbon credits, so this is a kind of to illustrate the parties that might be involved. So on the left there, obviously you've got a landowner. You've organizations like Wilder Way, so a carbon credit developer or project developer. They are usually following the rules of a given standard. So these can be international standards or local standards. And it's essentially the rule book for developing the carbon credits, and all of the criteria that you have to meet. You have the buyers of these credits, so the people essentially that are going to buy these things and ultimately benefit the landowner. And then you've lots of third parties that would be involved. So again, most credit standards would demand that projects are independently audited and verified. So you've independent auditors, you've got contractors, foresters, lots of different people involved. In terms of the kind of life cycle of a project then, so you've the development of a project design document or PDD, and this is a kind of a bureaucratic administrative exercise, I suppose, in terms of designing the project and documenting what should happen or what needs to happen, what will happen. Then you have the project validation phase. So again, this is when an independent third party would come in and say, the rules of this standard say you must do A, B, and C. Prove to me that you've done A, B, and C. Then the project gets registered on a public registry, and that basically says that this is a real project from which credits can be generated. Then you go into the kind of implementation and monitoring phase. So you do what needs to be done, I suppose, to generate the credits. And depending on the project, that could be any number of different things. And you're monitoring, and I suppose effectively for no matter what type of nature-based credit you're dealing with, you start with a baseline condition, you implement a change, and then you monitor the difference between the projected baseline scenario. So if you did nothing versus what you're doing now. So that's a really important concept to consider, because if you want to generate credits from your project, you need to have data that can back up both your baseline scenario and your project scenario. So it's important to kind of have this in mind before you do anything. You kind of can't generate credits retrospectively, I suppose, which is important to know. Then you get into the verification stage. So after a number of years, depending on the standard, again, you have an independent party that will come in and they will check, your data, and basically verify that you have generated a number of credits. Those credits then are issued, and they can be sold at that stage, or sometimes credits can be sold as like a pre-issuance unit or a kind of a pre-credit almost. And that cycle continues. So, if you were verifying your credits every 5 years over a 40-year period, for example, you would go through kind of 8 of these cycles. So that's the kind of general life cycle of a project. So this is some nice pictures to break up the presentation, or finish off the presentation, I suppose. So if you're establishing a forest in Ireland, the best way to fund that is usually going to be through the grants and premiums supplied by the government via DAFM. But they don't apply to all types of land or all types of landowners. So this is a site I visited recently. It's kind of an upland site, and it's the type of kind of rocky upland area that wouldn't typically qualify for grants. So that means that credits could play an important role in helping to kind of establish and maintain a forest on a site like this. You might say that not a lot of trees would grow here, but there's areas of kind of bracken and gorse and mineral soil that should support trees and would have supported trees in the past. And the more you look around, the more you see the kind of evidence of a forest that was here in the past. So there are some individual trees hanging on that have resisted the grazing pressures that we're all familiar with in these areas. They're usually in the particularly rocky or inaccessible areas or water courses where they're hanging on in there. So you've got holly and oak and alder and others. And I think co-benefits were also mentioned at the beginning. And again, if you look around, you see lots of signs of the types of vegetation that you associate with woodlands in these areas. So yeah, again, sometimes when we think about forests or credits, we may not kind of consider areas like these, but it's an area where I think credits could play an important role. So in summary, I think I'm at 14 minutes, so I better wrap up. So Wilder Way is a carbon and nature credit development company. We help landowners develop credits to fund nature restoration projects, including the establishment and maintenance of forests. There are lots of different types of carbon credits and lots of different types of carbon credit projects. Credits are one way of funding forestry projects in Ireland. There are many other ways, and depending on your project and your situation, it may or may not suit, but it's worth looking into. And credits could play a significant role in funding upland woodland regeneration in Ireland. That's me. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Kieran. That was very interesting indeed. Right, so we'll go back to our presentation. So now we're going to be handing over to Michelle, our stakeholder engagement coordinator, and she's going to take us through some case studies that are relevant.
Thank you, Anna. Yeah, so it was interesting. Kieran already mentioned some case studies on carbon credits, and I collected some case studies on forest carbon farming projects. And first, we will focus on some from the EU and what's happening there, because for Irish forest owners and communities, the most directly applicable examples may be those emerging within the European Union. And this is for several reasons. It's because the EU has the same regulatory framework, similar agricultural and forestry policy contexts, and comparable land holding scales. So I highlighted two case studies, one from Hungary and one from the Netherlands, and both are verified and both operate under EU frameworks, and also both can offer practical lessons for Ireland. Next slide. Yeah, so this is the first study. It's a small-scale food forest in the Netherlands called Leuker Voedselbos. The key lesson from this particular project is that it's a very small-scale project, so it's only 10 hectares, and it is at the moment generating verified carbon credits while also producing food and restoring biodiversity. So it has great co-benefits as well. So what happened in this project is that it started as kind of a traditional dairy farm. It was making a loss because they were only small, and there were lots of pressures on them. And they then transitioned to a regenerative food forest, and they planted all kinds of fruit and nut trees in 2025. And they did this with support from a sustainable agricultural investment fund. How it worked is that they planted multiple trees, multiple layers of fruit and nut trees, shrubs, and ground covers. And they also added rotational poultry grazing in it. And they also have an on-farm tour and a shop. And they are selling the credits from the planted trees. And at the moment, the numbers are that they have 870 ton CO2 credits in circulation and 500 available for purchase at the moment. So this is, a good example. And then the second example is in Hungary. It is a shelter belt carbon credits under EU CRCF regulation. It's kind of an agroforestry shelter belt project. And the key lesson that Ireland can kind of take away from this is that they use CAP funding. And then in combination with the carbon credit revenue, it creates a viable financial pathway. So what happened here is that so shelter belts are linear tree plantings, and they protect the fields from the wind and prevent the erosion of the topsoil. And establishing the shelter belt plantations can be a profitable investment across a relatively broad range of site conditions. So it's kind of a win-win situation. And so what's special about this project, how it works, is that the CAP financed the establishment, and then the carbon credits provided an additional income. And at the moment, there is 157 ton CO2 total sequestration. And yeah, Leslie, I want to talk about a kind of a potential Irish case study. So for scarbo farming, there are no credits sold yet in Ireland, so that's why it says potential. But this is a community-owned woodland, Glenbower Woods in Killa. It is community-owned since 1995. Organization was set up, Glenbower Wood and Lake CLG, by the community, and they could buy the land under very specific circumstances at the time. They bought it from what is now Quilche, and it is currently used for restoration and community use. And at the moment, it is run by a volunteer committee that has some set members and some change a bit over the years. And the pros of having a community-owned woodland is that there is local stewardship. It has the community is invested in this woodland. There is a connection with it. A community-owned woodland also has a big picture advantage. They don't have deadlines, they have to meet, or targets they have to meet. And it's a shared natural asset that delivers environmental, social, and health values to the community. Then some of the cons of being a community-owned woodland is that it is volunteer-based. So obviously there can be some issues with commitment and follow through. They also have some income issues sometimes. For example, they currently have a bridge that needs to be repaired, and it's hard for them to get the right funding because it doesn't always fit this governance structure. Because in Ireland, this is a very rare example where the community owns the woodland. This is not, one of a kind, really. So they kind of don't fit into any of the regulations where they can get funding from. Next slide, please. Therefore, maybe it is interesting if you think in the terms of carbon credits, that this could be also adding economic benefits to the community. At the moment, the community is restoring the nature in the woodland, and it would potentially be great if their efforts for restoration could be rewarded, and they could maybe gain carbon credits from this that they can then sell. So it is a more sustainable project in total. And there, carbon forestry and carbon credits are happening all over the world. These are just 4 other examples, which I don't have time to go through in detail, but just so you know that they are there, and they all offer different lessons that we can learn. So the slides will be shared afterwards, and you can, if you want, you can take a look into them more in detail. For example, the key lesson of this one, if you're interested in technology, it can lower the barrier for individual owners. This one, the study 2, is in Massachusetts. It's a lesson that collaboration creates skill. The third one in Ohio, the key lesson is that carbon finance can fund public amenities. And case study 4 is in China, is the key lesson that carbon finance could help deliver health, jobs, and gender equity. So if you're interested in any of these specific angles, you can take a look after the webinar. And these are just all the 6 models at glance. So you can see that they're in different places. They use different models, and they have different scales and different kind of potential income and different number of credits, and they all can kind of teach a lesson to Irish policy and development. I think there's a poll now. It should be on.
Yep. Thank you for that, Michelle. So we'll just give everybody a couple of minutes to respond to the poll. So now we're going to go on to the interactive part of the session. We're going to be creating 4 breakout rooms. And each breakout room will be discussing a different topic with a facilitator. So the first one's going to be about pathways and barriers. So which pathway seems most relevant to you? What might be the barriers that you might encounter on that pathway? Question 2 will be about equity, who gets included and who maybe gets left out of the process. Sorry, Mark, just and question 3 is about trust and governance. So how do we build trust into the carbon market? And then question 4 is going to be about policy. So Sinead, oh yeah, and we're going to have 15 minutes to discuss. So the time is 5 past, so we'll stop at 20 past and we'll return to the main room at 20 past. So Sinead is going to put everybody into breakout rooms now.
You're right. So for the project, the next steps in this is that together with the other project partners, a toolkit will be developed for forest carbon farming. And the purpose of this toolkit is meant to be a practical guide for forest owners, managers, and partners who want to develop forest carbon projects that generate carbon credits and new income, that support climate change mitigation, and that improve the biodiversity, water quality, and ecosystem health. And this is supposed to be like a step-by-step plan, basically, that's accessible for everyone to kind of have an overview on forest carbon farming and how to get started. I was wondering if you all could put one thing in the chat that you would expect to see in such a toolkit, because we are developing it right now. It would be nice to get your immediate thoughts on what you would like to see in this toolkit. And then for our next stakeholder event that we will have, we will kind of present version 1 of this toolkit and kind of co-develop it from there on. So meanwhile you're typing in chat, we can go to the other steps. So just on a bigger scale, on the EU scale, on the 20th and 21st of May, there will be an online event for the implementation of the EU regulation on carbon removal and carbon farming, also called CRCF. The CRCF Days is the major EU stakeholder event for translating the new legal framework into a functioning market. So it's important days. Day 1 will be mostly focused on permanent carbon removals, and then day 2 will be focused on carbon farming. And we thought we'd just let you know because you can register for it and via the EU survey at the following link. And I think the link is clickable when the slides are sent to you.
Yeah. Okay, great. So I think we're actually amazingly, we've managed to get it slightly ahead of schedule, which is great. So we've got plenty of time for questions. Was there anything in the chat, Sinead, that you spotted in terms of questions?
Mark had one where the market's also about the buyers of credits. So would they prefer to deal with many independent owners or larger groups and more collective deal making?
Good question. Would anyone like to have a go at responding to that question?
We might invite Kieran just to have a thought on that.
Based on our experience, it's the latter rather than the former. So I think buyers want the administrative ease of dealing with a collective, but want to talk about all of the benefits of dealing with lots of small landowners. And what I mean by that is oftentimes they like the story or the co-benefits, I suppose, and things like that associated with knowing that the revenue from credits is going to lots of small landholders. But in terms of the deal making, they want to be dealing with one intermediary or whatever way you want to put it.
Surely, yeah.
That's our experience, at least, anyway.
Okay, does anyone else want to come in on that one, or should we move on? Any more questions in the chat?
I didn't see any.
Okay.
I might share one which came from our breakout room, which
Yeah.
was about whether early movers might be slightly disenfranchised or disadvantaged by already having done some work around carbon before the opportunities come for entering the market. So kind of a question around early movers and if there's any disadvantage. And I think it's a good question, and it's one that is both for the kind of framing of all this, but also for the practice and perhaps for our handbook. I'm thinking about doing this, or I've already done some of this stuff on my land. Have I put myself at a disadvantage?
Okay. Is that another one for Kieran or maybe for Owen? Would anyone like to come in on that?
It very much depends on the scenario. I mean, I have spoken to dozens of farmers across the country with all the average small holding of, 6 or 7 hectares right up to 20 hectares. And they've got 15-year old forests and woodland. I think it's a very topical question, Mark, because their intentions way back before the carbon market existed would have been to, plant trees and gain an income. So it's always a fine balance of trying to weigh up the advantages of the environmental, the land stewardship, and the economic uh, um, models that come about. So there are, you could say, from the type of credit point of view, if you're going to a future projection type of credit and you want to establish principle of permanence and additionality, it's very difficult to do it on something that's been established for the last 15 years. Obviously, if you have a young plantation, that's much easier to put the ruler against. But with the new CRCF, those opportunities will be more, I suppose, practical and have a framework to work around in regard to extending rotations, improve forest management. So the opportunities will exist or become, let's say, more practical in how they can be implemented. But, speaking with some of the stakeholders involved in this, that could be some time off. But I won't say there'll be any more advantaged, but at least there may be a route through to the market, albeit the fact that it's going to be a more difficult one because it is an established forest. And regardless, and I said it in the breakout room, whatever project you have, uh, you can do all the really great things with it, but if it doesn't interest the buyer and it doesn't get the verification and the analysis from the demand side, that's going to be something that, everybody is going to have to be faced with.
Great. Okay. So Francis asked a question about time commitment, likely financial input and output in terms of selling carbon credits.
I think there was was it not an answer to
I think that was the
question?
written or the,
Mhm.
yeah.
Oh, sorry. Oh, okay, right. Okay. What a now I don't
Those
know.
are all answers. I think you're
Oh,
good on the chat.
okay. Okay. Would anybody like to unmute themselves, say anything, ask anything?
I would just say, relative to what Kieran said earlier, I think while there are more complexities around community groups and shared, collectives, uh, there is a power in the strength of one as well. But there has to be a very common aim and alignment from day one. Um, but certainly, and look, Kieran and I are in the same space, but we operate different models. Um, and I work almost with, you know, very small scale farms. But we put together portfolios for buyers. So it's a case of, we work with you through the whole process, but we then act as well as your kind of your marketplace and your portfolio manager when it comes to representing what goes into the market. And the buyers don't want to be talking directly to farmers and small scale guys. They want somebody who can speak their language and can represent the risks and the principles and the verification and all of the things that they will require from a professional purchasing organization.
Okay, thank you, everyone. So if there's no more
Could we,
questions, oh yeah, Mark, go ahead.
no, I just want to say there, is it possible that we could just set up a WhatsApp group as a temporary, start to
Well,
doing
we did
something more
actually
cohesive?
set up a Padlet. So there's a website called Padlet where you can have like an online group, which doesn't require you to have any of the social medias. So we did actually set that up. What we'll do is we'll share the link to that again after this. But what we were hoping would happen with that is that, all of the stakeholders that we have on our mailing list would join, and that they would be able to, that conversations would be able to take place on there. And we felt that that was the most accessible. It didn't require people to be on Facebook or WhatsApp or anything.
I
So
added
we'll
it
try
to
that
the
again.
chat.
Oh, thank you, Sinead. Yeah, so Sinead's put the link in the chat. So we would really encourage you guys, everyone who's here, to join the Padlet and join in the conversation online to continue, beyond the Living Labs. So here are a few links for the project website, for our website, Luca's website, and the other partners' websites. And we've got a final feedback online form, which we'd love you to complete before you head off and enjoy your evening. And just wanted to say thank you again to our speakers. Thank you to everybody who attended this evening, and we really appreciate that you're interested in the project and that you're interested in getting involved. And we hope that you'll continue to follow the project and contribute to the process of developing the toolkit. And we hope that this evening was interesting and useful. So I'll just give you a few minutes to complete the feedback form, and then we'll close the meeting.
Thank you.